I work as a watchman at the cemetery. At first, the job seemed ordinary, sitting in the small office doing my rounds maintaining order. The trespassers ranged from teenagers to vandals and, less often, Satanists. For the last 6 months, the old Oak Hill Cemetery had been quiet. I'd grown used to the monotony. I started in December. Oak Hill Cemetery is a place steeped in Victorian history, with mausoleums and faded gravestones. I settled in, grew accustomed to the deep silence, broken only by the wind and the rustle of leaves, to the sense of isolation among thousands of the dead. It was strange, yet peaceful. But 3 months ago, in March, everything changed. During one of my shifts, around 3 in the morning, I went on a round. I knew the route by heart, right up to the farthest, oldest section, which we called MTL, Mounds to the Light, a play on MTSC, Mogili Togo Sveta. It was dark there, the lamps barely glowed, the administration thought, the dead don't need light. Few people ever went to the MTL. Here stood ancient, moss-covered gravestones. The air was colder, heavier. I walked along a narrow path among the leaning slabs, my flashlight beam catching faded names. Suddenly, I noticed a figure about 100 meters away, near a massive granite monument. A man was sitting on the ground, leaning his back against the stone. My first thought, someone from the family who hadn't left yet. I shone the flashlight beam on him. The light picked out the back of a man in a dark coat. He wasn't moving. "Hey, sir, the cemetery is closed. Time for you to leave," I shouted. No reaction, he didn't even turn his head. Usually people get startled, but this man was like a statue. I moved toward him. "I'm coming over, sir. If you need anything, tell me. Otherwise, you will have to leave the premises." Silence again, only the wind howling. Taking a couple of more steps, I saw him begin to dissolve, without flashes or smoke. The figure simply became transparent, the edges of his coat blurring, merging with the darkness. His outline grew indistinct, translucent, until a second later, nothing remained in that spot but the gravestone and empty air. I stood there for a minute, maybe 2. It was freezing and I had goosebumps. I blinked, pinched myself. No, it wasn't a dream. Slowly, I walked over to the spot. The ground was cold, slightly damp. No footprints. I shined the light on the gravestone. Arthur Coleman died 3 years ago. That night, I chalked it all up to fatigue and imagination. I wrote in the logbook, "Old section checked, all in order." What else could I write? They'd send me to a doctor. My next shift was 3 days later. It passed calmly, as did the one after. I was already starting to forget the strange encounter. But then, it happened again. Another round, around 3 in the morning, the old section again. And he was sitting in the same spot, by the same grave. This time, I didn't yell. My voice was stuck in my throat, my heart pounding. I just stopped and watched. The figure was clear, a man in his 50s wearing the same coat, sitting motionless, head bowed. He looked absolutely real. But I already knew he wasn't. I pulled up my phone, 3:33 a.m. I memorized it instantly. I stood and watched him for about 5 minutes. He didn't move. Then I decided to approach from the other side, slowly, almost sneaking. But as soon as I crossed an invisible boundary, about 50 feet from him, he began to vanish again. Just as smoothly, without a sound, he melted into the night air. After that, it dawned on me. These weren't hallucinations. This was real, and it happened always at the same time. Every shift I worked, if I went on my round around 3:30, I'd see him. Precisely at 3:33 a.m., he'd appear by Arthur Coleman's grave and just sit there. I had to mentally prepare for these meetings. My mundane job had acquired a spine-chilling significance. Okay, down to business. I'd had enough of these pointless rounds. I decided to change tactics. I brought my trusty binoculars from home, a good, powerful pair that could spot a fly on the moon. Now I didn't wander through the old sections. Instead, I set up on a small hill. From there, the whole eerie corner, and most importantly, his grave, were in plain view. It was about 200 meters to the gravestone, but with my optics, it seemed like I was sitting right behind him. And so, my next shift arrived. I was back on the hill, eyes glued to the binoculars, staring at the emptiness by the tombstone. Right at 3:33 a.m., and this is where the truly creepy part begins. He didn't arrive from somewhere, nor appear from the fog. He just materialized. First, the air around the grave seemed to thicken, condense, and then his figure emerged from this shimmering substance. He sat down and froze. Through the binoculars, I could see him in minute detail. His face was utterly ordinary, no horrific features or grimaces, just unbelievably sad and impossibly tired. Short dark hair, cleanly shaved. Honestly, if I'd met him on the street during the day, I wouldn't have given him a second glance. Nothing about him suggested a visitor from the afterlife. Naturally, I started digging. Arthur Coleman, who was he? In the cemetery archives, the info was, as usual, sparse. Dates of birth and death, plot number, cause of death, car crash, died instantly, buried by his wife, Emily Coleman. Nothing to explain his nocturnal visits. I scoured the entire internet, finding a couple of old news clippings about the accident. A head-on collision on a country highway. The other driver survived, but Arthur Coleman, 42, died before medics arrived. And, lo and behold, there was his photo from some corporate brochure. No doubt, this was the very man I saw every single cursed night. My nights turned into some kind of mystical ritual. I did my rounds either earlier or later, and exactly at 3:30 a.m., I'd be sitting on the hill with the binoculars, mesmerized. I watched him. He never did anything. He just sat there. Sometimes, very rarely, he'd lift his head and stare up at the night sky. I tried everything I could think of. I shouted from the hill. No reaction. I shone a powerful flashlight. The beam simply passed right through him, not reflecting an inch. He was there, yet he wasn't. And you know, it didn't scare me in the usual sense. I didn't feel the urge to run away screaming. It was a different feeling, a cold, heavy unease. I became obsessed with it. I couldn't sleep properly during the day. My mind was only on him. Why was he here? Why did he come to his own grave? And why at this exact time? I even started checking if he appeared on my days off. I'd drive my car, leave it further down the road, and sneak to my observation post. And yes, he was there. Every night, precisely at 3:33 a.m. One day, I decided it was time to try getting closer. Maybe if I moved very, very slowly, something would change. I started my descent from the hill long before he appeared. I crawled as close as possible and hid behind a large, massive cross on a neighboring grave. Only about 30 steps remained to Arthur Coleman's gravestone, no more. I lay on the cold ground and waited. 3:33 a.m. The air shuddered and he appeared. I'd never seen him this close before. I could make out every crease in his coat, how the wind, though there seemed to be no wind, rustled his hair. He sat down as usual. I lay there holding my breath. I didn't want him to disappear. I wanted to understand. I watched for about 10 minutes, then I made my move. I slowly, very slowly, got to my feet. He didn't react. I took one step, then another. He sat motionless. I got even closer. Only 10 meters left. I could have spoken to him in a whisper. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he must hear it. I took one more step, and at that moment he raised his head. Slowly. He looked not at me, but through me, and then his figure began to melt. But this time, just before he completely vanished, he turned his head and looked directly into my eyes. The gaze was absolutely empty. Not angry, not kind, not even sad. Just empty, like a mannequin's. And then he was gone. I was left standing alone amidst the graves. My ears were ringing. And that's when I felt true primal fear for the first time. Because up until then, he was just a phenomenon to me, part of the landscape, a mystery. But now, he knew I was there. He saw me. For the next few shifts, I didn't go anywhere near that section. I returned to my hill, but something had changed. Now, when he appeared, he didn't just sit with his head down. Sometimes he'd turn it in my direction, not looking directly, just turning. As if he knew I was there, on the hill, with my binoculars, and was letting me know it. This went on for several weeks. I was beginning to think. I thought it would be like this forever. Me, him, and these nightly vigils. Strangely, I even found a kind of perverse peace in it. But one time, near the end of May, everything went to hell. The weather was awful. Rain pouring down, wind howling, chilling you to the bone. I was sitting in my little booth, as usual, staring at the camera monitoring the old section. The quality was terrible, but I'd aimed it specifically at his grave. I just needed to spot his dark silhouette or not. And then, 3:33 a.m., the spot appeared. Even in this terrible weather, he showed up. So, I was sitting there, sipping my tea, glued to the monitor. And then the two-way radio on the desk started screeching. This was extremely strange, as there was no one on my frequency. Just me and the dispatcher, and he hadn't said a peep all night. The static quieted, and a voice crept out of the speaker, soft as if from underwater, through the interference. But damn it, clear. Alex. I froze, the cup in my hand. That was my name. No one but the dispatcher could call me on the radio. "Dispatcher, is that you?" I asked into the microphone, though I already knew in my gut it wasn't him. In response, more static and then the same voice, but a little clearer. "Don't come near, not tonight." I looked at the monitor. The figure by the grave was frozen, completely still. "Who is this?" I managed to croak, my voice barely audible. "Just listen," the voice rasped from the radio. "I don't have much time, it's always running out." I stayed silent, gripping the radio until my knuckles were white. It couldn't be. It must be some joker playing with a scanner. But that voice, it gave me goosebumps. It was so lifeless. "I know you're watching," he continued. "Every night. I didn't want all this. I just come here. This is the only place I can still remember." "Remember what?" I pressed. "Everything. My home, my dog, my wife, my daughter. Here it's all still with me. When I leave here, out there, it's emptiness." I had no idea what to say. I stared at the blurred shadow on the screen, listening to the voice on the radio. "Why are you talking to me?" I asked. "I need help, Alex. No one else can do it. Only you. You're here. You see everything, right? What kind of help? What should I do?" A long pause, just the crackle of static. I thought the connection was lost. But then he spoke again, and his words sent a chill through my veins. "My daughter," he whispered. "Her name is Sarah. She's in danger. And my wife? She won't believe it. You have to go to them. You have to tell her." "Tell her what? That her dead dad is communicating with me over the radio? They'll commit me straight to the asylum. Tell her about the silver crescent moon pendant. I gave it to her for her 16th birthday. Tell her she must wear it. Always. It will protect her. I was silent, stunned. This wasn't just some nightly phantom anymore. This was something that had burrowed right into my life. Why me? I finally managed. Because he's coming for her soon, just like he came for me. Who is he? The voice didn't answer. The radio crackled even louder, and through the static I caught a word, sounding like a fragment of a phrase or maybe a name. It sounded like chauffeur or something similar. And then, silence. The connection cut off. I looked at the monitor. The figure by the grave dissolved. The clock read 3:49 a.m. I sat in my booth, rooted to the spot until morning. The rain kept drumming on the roof, and that's when it first truly hit me. I was in deep. In a story I couldn't just walk away from. I had information I shouldn't possess, and a request from someone who wasn't supposed to exist. I had no idea what to do with any of it. But one thing I knew for sure. The next night, I had to talk to him again. And this time, I had to be ready to ask the right questions. The night after that radio show was probably the longest of my life. I didn't leave the booth until dawn, staring at the empty monitor where Arthur's silhouette had recently been. The rain had subsided, and in the pre-dawn mist, the cemetery looked utterly alien, otherworldly. The word chauffeur was stuck in my head like a splinter. Yes, it was muffled, distorted, but I was sure I'd heard it. Chauffeur, driver. It must refer to the other party in that horrible accident. When my shift ended, I dragged myself home completely broken. I couldn't sleep. Thoughts swirled in my head, giving me no rest. A request from a dead man. It sounded like the ramblings of a complete lunatic, but those details. The silver crescent moon pendant, a 16th birthday gift. It was too specific to simply write off as glitches or an overactive imagination. To shrug that off? No way. If even 1 in a million chances pointed to the truth, and some Sarah was genuinely hanging by a thread, I simply couldn't sit idly by. Of course, the first thing I did was rush to the computer. I had to find them. Emily and Sarah Coleman. Our town isn't a metropolis, so it didn't seem like an impossible mission. I started with the simplest, social media. I found a couple of Emily Colemans. One fit the description exactly, a woman in her 40s, a bunch of relatives with the same last name in her friends list. The profile was private, but the avatar showed her hugging a teenage girl. My Sarah, my intuition suggested. Finding Sarah Coleman's profile was even easier. Open, like most teenagers. Hundreds of photos. With friends, from school, from various trips. I started methodically scrolling through them all, year by year, plunging into the past. I felt like a total scumbag, prying into someone else's life, but stopping was beyond my control. And then, bingo, a photo posted 2 years ago, a garden party, a cake with candles, and around Sarah's neck, clearly visible, hung a small silver pendant, that crescent moon. In that moment, everything flipped upside down. This was undeniable proof. Arthur wasn't lying, and I couldn't sit on the sidelines just watching anymore. I printed out the news clipping about the accident. It stated that the second driver, the one behind the wheel of the truck, survived, albeit with injuries. His name was Robert Skinner. He testified that Coleman's car had suddenly swerved into the oncoming lane. The investigation confirmed Arthur's front left tire had burst. The case was closed as an accident. Robert Skinner, chauffeur, driver. It all clicked, damn it. I tried to dig up information on Skinner, but nothing came up. A couple of old local news snippets about minor offenses years ago, and that was it. Nothing that even remotely hinted at a threat. The next 3 days, my legal days off, I was literally on edge. I bought a small digital voice recorder. If Arthur showed up again, I had to record it. Why? I had no idea, but I felt it was crucial. When my shift came around again, I acted on my new plan. An hour before his usual appearance, I was already at my observation post on the hill. But now I had the radio and the recorder. I sat in the pitch black, peering at Arthur's grave and waiting. The night was quiet, starry. 3:33 a.m. He appeared, as always, from nowhere and settled down by his gravestone. I gave him a couple of minutes to get comfortable. Then I turned on the recorder and brought the radio to my lips. "Arthur," I whispered. "It's Alex. I'm here." Silence. I almost thought I'd failed. Maybe the last time was just a fluke or a glitch. "I checked," I continued, without much hope for an answer. "The pendant. She has it. I saw the photo." The radio crackled. The static was stronger than last time, as if someone was trying to jam him. "He knows," Arthur's voice broke through the static. "Knows that you..." "Arthur, I can barely hear you. Who is he? Robert Skinner, the truck driver?" "Not his name." The voice was filled with unbearable suffering. "He wears faces like clothes. His name isn't Robert. Then what is it? Tell me, Arthur, what is this creature?" "He was in the car with me," the voice whispered, barely audible. That was impossible. The report said Arthur was alone. "Took my body and threw me out." "What are you talking about? That wasn't in the report. You were alone." "He's near her, watching, waiting." Arthur's voice weakened, fading. "She doesn't believe it. She thinks I went mad before I died." "What do you mean?" "I tried to warn her, said strange things that I was being followed. Emily called a doctor. She thought my paranoia was just getting worse. Maybe Arthur really was suffering from some kind of mental disorder before he died. And all this was just the echo of his sick mind. But the locket. Arthur, I need more. I can't just show up at your wife's and daughter's place and dump this on them. They'll call the police. I need something only your family knows. Something I can check." A long, agonizing pause ensued. All I could hear was the static of the radio and my own heavy breathing, which the dictaphone was faithfully recording. "Under the porch," the radio finally crackled. "The old house, back porch. A brick. It wiggles. The third one from the right. What's there?" The voice of Arthur trembled. "Ah, it's a tackle box. My old one. I hid Sarah's first booties in there. The tiny ones. Born prematurely. Emily wanted to throw them out, but I wouldn't let her." Arthur's words, full of tenderness and desperate hope, hung in the night air. Suddenly, his voice broke off. The radio rasped and went silent. No matter how many times I tried to call him, the reply was a dead silence. I pressed my eye to the binoculars, but the spot where his figure had flickered was empty. My heart clenched with a terrible premonition. Now I had a new goal: to find their old house. I quickly found information about Arthur and Emily's property online. They had sold it about a year ago, shortly after Arthur's disappearance. The address was on the other side of town. The next day, I drove there. Before me stood an ordinary small house in a quiet suburb. The new owners were home, and I had to wait. I returned several times until the house was empty. In the evening, as dusk deepened, I parked around the corner and walked, trying to stay in the shadows. My heart was pounding. I felt like a criminal, but the image of the booties drove me forward. The back porch was low and wooden. Crouching down, I turned on my flashlight and the beam picked out a row of bricks from the darkness. There it was, the third brick from the right. It wasn't set tightly. I carefully pried it up and it easily gave way, revealing a dark void. Holding my breath, I reached inside, hitting something hard and metallic. I pulled it out, and there it was. An old, scratched, rusty metal tackle box. exactly as Arthur had described. My hands were shaking with excitement as I opened the tight latches. Inside, among rusty hooks and scraps of fishing line, lay a carefully wrapped bundle of yellowed fabric. I unwrapped it, and there they were in my palm, tiny knitted booties, no bigger than my thumb. They were so fragile, so delicate. I just sat there in the dark, looking at this evidence of a father's love. All doubt vanished. Everything Arthur had said was true. If he was telling the truth about this, then he was telling the truth about the sinister danger looming over his daughter. Carefully returning the bundle of booties to the box and the box to the hiding place, I meticulously set the brick back. Back in the car, I couldn't just leave. My brain was working feverishly. I took out the dictaphone and played the recording. Arthur's voice, now distorted by static, sounded even more ominous. "He wears faces like clothes. He was in the car with me." These words pierced me to the bone. What kind of entity was this, capable of changing its shape, being so close to a person? The thought that it could have been near Arthur when he vanished was unbearable. Now I knew for sure. I couldn't delay for a second. My role as a cemetery watchman was over. I soon found out the address where Emily and Sarah now lived, an apartment in a high-rise building. The next day, right after my shift, I headed there. I wasn't going to knock, I just wanted to make sure they were okay. I parked across the street, taking up a surveillance position. Around 1 in the afternoon, Sarah came out of the entrance, a typical teenager in jeans, a hoodie with a backpack glued to her phone, nothing alarming. She disappeared into the neighboring entrance, likely heading to her apartment. I sat in the car for another hour, nothing happened. I was almost starting to calm down. And then, a car pulled up to the entrance. A dark, unremarkable sedan, blending into the background. It didn't park. It stopped at the curb, engine idling. A man was in the driver's seat. I couldn't see his face through the tinted glass, but something about him felt alien. He sat and looked directly at the windows where the Coleman family lived. He sat absolutely motionless for about 10 minutes, like a statue. There was something unnatural, something chilling about his frozen posture. He radiated a sense of focused menace. Then he slowly started the engine and silently drove away, dissolving into the traffic. I didn't know if it was Robert Skinner, but Arthur's words pierced through. He's near her, watching. There was almost no time left. I couldn't be a watchman anymore. Now I was the only one standing between Sarah and the person sitting in that car. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. The next night I had to wring one last answer out of Arthur. Not just information, but a key, a clue, the single thread capable of unraveling the knot I was stuck in up to my neck. What the hell was I supposed to do? This question drilled into my brain, giving me no rest for a second, turning every minute into torture, drawing me closer to the decisive moment that could either be my salvation or my ultimate failure. The stakes were not just high, they were catastrophically impossible to bear, and I felt my own reality cracking under their weight. That night was simply unbearable. The sky was covered with thick, low clouds that let through not a single ray of moon or star. The air was heavy, damp, saturated with the smell of decaying leaves and wet earth, characteristic of the old cemetery sprawled at the foot of my hill. I was stuck at my observation post, on the top of this cursed hill, where every stone seemed to absorb the cold and despair. My old, battered radio, with its worn casing and perpetually hissing speaker, was clutched in my sweaty palms like a life raft. I waited for any signal, any slightest rustle in the airwaves that might herald his arrival. But Arthur didn't appear. The hours dragged on endlessly, each tick echoing as a dull thud in my temples. The wind whistled through the dry branches of the trees, creating a creepy symphony, and the shadows around me seemed to thicken, taking on form. Watching my lonely vigil, I felt like a cornered animal trapped between hope and hopelessness, and every minute without his appearance only intensified this oppressive feeling. And then, when the clock hands showed 3:33, the time that had become a kind of mystical frontier for both of us, he appeared. Right on schedule, as if an invisible conductor had given a signal, his figure materialized by the grave he always came to. It wasn't his grave, but a place that obviously held a deep, unspoken meaning for him. He sat down as before, on the cold stone, but this time he looked different. This different pierced me to the core. Even through the binoculars, which usually allowed me to distinguish the smallest details in the pitch darkness, I could see that his figure had become somewhat blurry, less solid, almost ethereal. It was as if the static that hissed in my radio was now visible to the naked eye, enveloping his silhouette. His outlines flickered, like an image on an old, dying television desperately trying to catch a signal, but only producing ripple and distortion. I could see the faint light of the cemetery lamps shining through him, how his shape would contract, then stretch, as if he were made of smoke about to dissipate. This wasn't just a blur. It was a harbinger of disintegration. He sat like that for about 15 minutes. 15 endless minutes, during which I didn't take my binoculars off him, trying to catch the slightest movement, any hint that he was still here, that he was still capable of perceiving. But he remained motionless, like a statue carved from mist. He never once turned his head my way, never once looked up to meet my gaze, although I was sure he knew of my presence. His posture was one of deep sorrow, or perhaps complete indifference to the surrounding world. And then he simply vanished. He didn't slowly dissolve, as he had on previous nights, when his figure gradually melted away like wax, leaving behind only a slight trembling of the air. No, this time I just blinked, and he was gone, as if someone had suddenly cut the power to a projector, leaving behind only emptiness, an absolute ringing silence, and a burning sensation of loss. My heart skipped a beat, and then started pounding at a frantic speed, echoing as a dull thump in my ears. In that moment, I understood. I understood with a chilling clarity that pierced me through. Time was running out. It wasn't just ending. It was rapidly flowing away like sand through my fingers. His ability to communicate in any way and simply to hold on here, in this world, on the edge between being and non-being, was fading with every moment. He was turning into an echo, a memory, a barely perceptible shadow that was about to disappear forever. And with him, the last answer that could change everything would also vanish. Panic, cold and sticky, began to rise from the pit of my stomach, squeezing my throat. If I didn't get that answer now, I would never get it. And then everything I had been through this hell for, all my efforts, all the sleepless nights and agonizing waits, all of it would be for nothing. I felt his essence thinning, the threads connecting him to our reality snapping one by one. He wasn't just leaving, he was disintegrating, dissolving into oblivion, and I was powerless to stop the process. Only one thing remained: to act. Immediately. Otherwise, I would lose Arthur forever, and with him, the last chance for salvation. The window was smashed to hell. The interior was a complete mess, the seats ripped out as if the devil himself had clawed them. I had to struggle with the crowbar to unlock that damn door, which was jammed solid, the smell inside. Shudder. A mix of gasoline, rotten upholstery, and something sickly sweet that made my stomach turn. exactly like the smell of an old grave where something isn't right. Well, I started searching. The driver's seat was simply crushed into the dashboard, as if an unseen force had slammed it there. With my flashlight, I scanned every corner, digging through piles of trash and broken glass. My hands were already up to the elbows in dirt and oil. I cut myself a couple of times on sharp metal edges, and finally, my fingers hit it. Right under the twisted seat rail, something yellow glinted in the compacted dirt. I pried it out with the crowbar. Just a plain gold wedding ring. Nothing special, seemingly. But it became my anchor, my doom. As soon as I clenched it in my fist, such a chill went through me. Not just the night cold, but right to the bone, to the very soul. I looked up, and there, at the end of the driveway, between those heaps of scrap metal, headlights flashed. That same dark sedan I had seen at Sarah's house. It was standing about 100 meters from me, the engine idling. The door swung open and a silhouette emerged. Tall, all in black. It stood and watched, unmoving. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze. Chilling, penetrating. It wasn't yelling, it wasn't running, it was just standing there and knowing. Knowing I was here. Knowing what I held in my hand. Panic washed over me. I wanted to drop everything and bolt. But then I remembered Arthur's empty eyes and that whisper from the radio. I had to get the torch out of my backpack. My hands were shaking. I barely struck a spark. Finally, a blue hissing flame erupted. I threw the ring onto the hood of that wreck, aimed the nozzle, and pressed the valve. The gold began to heat up, turning red as if filling with blood. And there, in the distance, the silhouette took a step. Then another. Slowly but inexorably, it moved towards me. It wasn't running, but walking with a stride that sent shivers down my spine. I kept switching my gaze between it and the ring. The gold was already starting to melt, losing its shape, turning into a formless, gruesome drop. The figure sped up its pace. It was 50 meters away now. I held the torch valve down, pouring all my will, all my anger, all my hope into that tiny piece of metal. And then, when the ring finally lost its shape, turning into a small, hissing lump, that silhouette flashed. Its outlines flickered, rippled like on an ancient television. It stopped. Its figure began to distort, stretch, and then it simply dissolved into the air. Vanished, as if it had never been there. The sedan's headlights went out, and a moment later, the car itself was also gone. Complete silence. Only me, the noise of the torch, and the acrid smell of ozone. How I got out of that cursed junkyard and drove home. I couldn't tell you to save my life. The next day, I wrote a letter. Of course, without any talk of ghosts or curses. Who would believe that? I wrote to Emily Coleman, saying that I was an old friend of Arthur's who they had lost touch with. That Arthur was out of sorts before that accident, saying someone was following him and his family. And that he made me promise, if anything happened, I had to make sure Sarah always wore the silver locket he gave her. Like a charm against something. I lied that I had found this ring at the accident site many years ago and decided it should be with them. I put the letter and this cooled, but still sinister, gold ingot in the envelope. That night I drove up to their house, slipped the envelope into the mailbox and sped away. Far away. Several months have passed since then. I still work at Oak Hill Cemetery, but Arthur Coleman has never appeared again. His spot by the grave at 3:33 every night is now empty. And his voice from the radio, I haven't heard it once more. A couple of weeks ago, during the day, I drove past Sarah's school. I saw her walking out with her friends, laughing. And on her neck, a silver crescent moon locket, shining brightly in the sun. Like a protection. Sometimes when I have nothing better to do, I check the news from other states. I look for reports of strange accidents where survivors mumble incoherently, and witness testimonies contradict each other. And the official accident report on Arthur Coleman and Robert Skinner, it was recently simply deleted from the police database. The reason? Technical glitch in the server archive. Yeah, right. In some server.